There are times that giving aid to the poor and oppressed requires neither travel nor money, but simply a willingness to use the gifts and experience you have in your hand. This was the case for Christchurch man Charles Manning, a former City Councillor and Environment Court Commissioner, who approached Global Equity Brokers founder Eric Park after he had presented to a local group.
Eric was talking about work that he was doing with various needy communities, and I said to him at the end of it, look, if you've any work that a elderly retired Environment Commissioner might need, might be useful for, just let me know. And Eric happened to have the project in hand that was really a project about the location of coal-fired and one nuclear-fired power plant on the Chennai coast in India, and the effects this was having on the fishing industry, where there were cases due, and I think we thought that it might be helpful if I had contact with the people concerned and offered some assistance.
The Indian fisherfolk were being kicked off their land by power plants being built up and down the coast. The plants destroy fisheries, wipe out the people's income and livelihood, and are even wiping out the villages where they live, aided by officials ignoring national legislation. Over 25 years, a small group of dedicated community leaders there have rallied together illiterate fishing folk to take a stand for their rights. Eric believed Charles could help them.
Well, at Eric's house we met one night and we Skyped Yesu and one or two other people from Natal. We talked a little bit about the case, and they sent through by fax a whole pile of information, wasn't it, that practically broke your printer or certainly ran you out of paper in bringing out. I read all the material, decided that the relevant thing that I could do for them was to analyse the case and to see what evidence might be necessary. I think at one point they'd hoped that I would go over there, but it probably wouldn't have been personally terribly convenient, but also I think it would have been a mistake, because the last thing an Indian court was likely to want to hear was somebody from overseas telling them how they should manage their affairs. So what I basically did was to analyse the earlier decisions, to see what evidence the court might need to convince it that the power plant shouldn't go ahead. And I did this with two of the power plants, but hoped that the principles that we looked at would simply carry over to the other cases. I sort of read what I could of environmental legislation in India. Talked to a colleague in the Environment Court who'd also had experience there. I then analysed the material and saw what evidence might be needed to convince the Green Court that they should turn the power plants down. It did seem to me that what had happened is that some of the agencies employed to comment on their application, professional organisations employed to comment on their application by the power companies, had been content to do a sort of once-over lightly job. Not quite saying what they were paid to say, but were basically prepared to do a fairly surface investigation. The one that actually struck me as really peculiar was the offer to build there were going to be jetties put out into the coast, and the power plants were going to discharge into the water that would basically affect the benthic environment and the marine environment. And one of the power companies did, which I thought gave the game away, was to offer to build a separate harbour for some of the fisherfolk to fish in, which begged the question of what was going to happen, how all the fish were going to get there, and what was going to happen to the fish when they were in the rest of the estuary.
What was it like working at long distance with a group like that?
Well, you were really, in a sense, working on your own, hoping it would be useful. The situation this group were faced with was disastrous in terms of their whole way of life, really, because they were dependent on being able to fish the estuary. And if the fishery failed, then the ability of the area, the coastal area where they were living, to support a great many of them would be not just diminished, it would be gone entirely.
Bringing all these things together, Charles emailed back a report giving advice to the local groups, helping them understand who they should be talking to, what expert witnesses they could call to bolster their case, where was the developer's case weak, where could they be targeted. Charles's input, energy and expertise made connections, provided support. As it turns out, Charles's father had spent many years in India, and connected globally as an Environment Court Commissioner, Charles could also call on friends in the Indian legal system. In the process, he became one of a number of legal experts and government officials who joined the cause. Through all this, education and publicity campaigns have been run, demonstrations and protests held, submissions made, and people thrown into jail. In the midst, the fisherfolk are standing firm and making gains. Vast new developments seeking to evict fisherfolk and destroy their livelihoods are being forced to rethink and respect the locals and the law. So, giving his time and expertise, Charles was able to make a deep and meaningful difference to some of the poorest people on the planet, who were being driven from their homes and stripped of their livelihoods. It was a gift more valuable than any money he could afford to give, and he didn't even need to leave home. What would you say to other people in terms of what they could do to help?
Well, I mean, there are all sorts of things that people could do. What's really needed is somebody to match up the skills of the people. Sometimes we can assist from here, sometimes we need to go overseas to assist. And as Eric knows, I've sort of cajoled other people into coughing up money that, there are people who have goodwill, who want to assist, both in environmental projects and in relief of poverty type of projects. If they've got a vehicle to contribute both their money and their skills, that's important.